And we are back with the next video. So we're going to today look into how to set up our module script being called through a global script setup in using our local scripts so that the client-side stuff can run all using the same sort of method as well. We're going to go ahead and jump into that right now. Alright, so right now I just have the server script, the global server script that we made last video up here. We did have this day-night cycle. Again, you don't necessarily have to know how to do that specific script in order to follow along with us, but it does kind of help to have some sort of script set up. So at least watching the last video on how to set up these module scripts is going to be really helpful. So this all works on the server side, which is great. We want to make some things that are also going to let us run on the client side. The way we're going to do that is we're going to call this global server script as a global local script and are replicated first. And then as I'm doing this, just so you know, we'll do a local script here. This is basically an idea from Suphi, who is another YouTube creator. This is going to be our global local script. And he goes through a lot of the setup on this and talks about how useful it is, which is really great. Highly recommend checking him out. I've got his channel linked in the description below, and you can go through all of his videos. He's really, really smart when it comes to Roblox scripting. It's something that helped me bridge the gap between my Roblox scripting concepts versus things that I already knew on other programming languages, such as Python, C++, and whatnot. So from here, we're going to copy and paste our global server script because we do want pretty much the same thing. I'm going to put this on a second line here though. The main difference here, instead of going through our server script service, of course, we're going to be going through our replicated first. So that we are actually looking through whatever scripts we have in our replicated first. And just like before, I do like having a folder in here that we can call scripts. So that way we can organize anything. If we have other things that are going to be in our replicated first service, then we can have them separated from whatever our actual scripts are. So what we're going to be doing in here is actually making a module script today. I'm going to walk through how to do a simple motion blur script, and this motion blur is just going to give you a little more cinematic look to your game as your camera's moving really fast. It helps blur more, which can just look a little nicer, helps smooth things out, especially if it's at a little lower frame rate for whoever's system it's running on. So the last thing we need to do within this, though, is make sure that we are checking if the game is loaded. And if the game is loaded, then we can move on and actually find all of our module scripts that are going to be in our replicated first. It'll check if they have an initialize function, if they have an initiate function. It'll run those accordingly. I've not come across the issue, by the way, just to kind of reach back to the last video, as far as needing to run the coroutine on an initialize function, just because typically when you're doing an initialize function in your module scripts, it's to just get something going and useful for something else to use, and then it moves on. So it doesn't typically run across the issues like the initiate function does, where we have, in our case, our day-night cycle running an infinite loop, where it's just running infinitely to move the daytime forward. So you shouldn't necessarily have to use a coroutine wrap function on this, or on the initialize. But if you do come across any issues where you're not getting, for example, if you have this not commented out and you're not getting that key value pair printed, or things aren't moving on and not initiating, it could be because you have an infinite loop happening somewhere in an initialize function. So in that case, you would probably want to wrap it with a coroutine. But aside from that, let's go ahead and get to adding how we can check if the game is loaded or not. So quite simply, if game is loaded, right? So if the game is loaded, and this is going to return a boolean, it's going to return either true or false. So if it's false and the game isn't loaded, then we want to go game.loaded, right, which fires on the client when the game finishes loading. Loaded. We want to go ahead and wait. So we are waiting until the game is loaded, basically. So this waits for game to finish loading. This is basically going to help ensure other local scripts exist. Do this properly here. Local scripts exist. So what do I mean by that? So there's a lot of local scripts that you're going to end up using in most games, typically on like starter player scripts and stuff. And a lot of local scripts that you run the way that we're doing them here, you want to make sure those local scripts actually load up on the player, on the character, into the game before you start cycling through them and calling them, because you're going to come across times where, let's say you've got 5 local scripts in your scripts folder here, 2 of them might load up before this starts looking through them. You're going to miss 3 of them, right? So you want to make sure that the game is actually loaded before you do that. So another thing to note here is right here would be a perfect place to start your loading screen. We'll do loading screen start, right? And then down here you would do loading screen end. So what that means is you can initiate your loading screen here, which I might do a video in the future of how to set that up. Your game's gonna pop up a wallpaper, right, for them to look at. It's gonna have maybe a bar, and it's gonna load all of the assets of the game in and actually load the game up, and then it's going to be loaded. So then the game is going to be loaded and it shouldn't have to wait anymore. And then it's going to go through and it's going to fire off any initialize and initiate functions for any of your local scripts that you have in here. And then once that's done, then you can basically destroy your loading screen and set everything back to normal. In other words, right? You turn all your normal UI elements on. So again, that's something that we can set up later in a further video. But this is how you essentially set up the difference between your local global script and your server global script. So let's go ahead and get a module script going in here, and this is going to be, again, a motion blur. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my modules are renamed to motion blur as well. So this module script is going to allow us to, when we move our camera back and forth really quickly, because some clients will have problems keeping up. Like if I do this, and UT's probably going to destroy this anyways, but if I do this, it's really still pretty crisp and clean. There's no motion there, and it doesn't look all that great. Now, obviously, you wouldn't really do that normally, but if you're constantly moving your screen back and forth like this as a player, first of all, you're weird, which is fine. But second of all, it doesn't look all that great in cinematic. Notice my day-night cycle is going a little quick still, so let's go ahead and change that. We'll go and set that back to our default of 180, and close that now. So we want to just put some cinematic motion blur in there. Easy way to do this is we're actually going to go ahead and put this right into the initiate function, the whole thing. So we'll do motion blur, and we'll do initiate. All right, so very simple, very similar to what we did on our day-night cycle. This is going to be a function. We are not going to take any arguments in here. So in this function now, we're going to start with some variables. We'll go ahead and do this is a blur amount. So our blur amount is going to be a multiplier on how much blur we actually want. A good amount that I've found, a good value that I've found for that is 20, and we'll go ahead and set default is 20, just to make sure that we have that set up as well. And you can play around with these. You might find values that you prefer. All right, so now we're going to set some default values for our camera, the look vector of our camera, and our basically blur instance that we're going to create. These are things that are going to change every time the camera changes, but this is still a good way to set these up by default. We have to get them going. So we're going to say camera, which is going to be a reference to our player's camera, the current camera actually. So we're going to do workspace dot current camera. You can see it there. And then we need to get the last look is what we're doing here. So where was our camera last looking? And we're going to do that by getting camera dot cframe, and we're going to get the look vector. So the look vector, as you can see, the forward direction component of the C-frame object's orientation, equivalent to the negated form of Z vector. What you need to know is basically this is where the camera was last looking, right? So when we take that and we move our camera around, we're going to basically make changes to how much blur amount there is based on that, and then we'll set some things up. I'll show you that here in just a second. Last one we're going to set up is actually creating an instance of blur. So we're going to do blur, and this is going to be an instance.new, and this will be a blur effect like that. Some people might parent this immediately and just do camera here, for example, I have found, and I think it's even recommended by Roblox themselves, to not necessarily go that route. It does still work to parent it immediately. However, you might come across issues where doing that sort of parenting doesn't always parent properly, so you want to typically put it on a second line. Typically after you've done everything else as well. It just really guarantees that you've got the regular proper structure that you need. So we're going to set the camera as the parent of this blur instance. All right, so now we need to know when our camera has moved, when things have changed, and the easiest way to check if things have changed is we can just go workspace.changed, and this is an event that fires immediately after a property of an object changes, and we're going to go ahead and connect a function. This is going to take an input here. We'll go ahead and we'll do C for camera, just to make that easy. So we want to check if C is equal to current camera, right? So if the current camera is what has changed, actually, let's do this first. So if it is not equal to the current camera, then, well, no, we won't do that. We're going to do it equal. So if it's equal to the current camera, then what we want to do. So now we want to reset the camera, make sure the camera is still the current camera. So we'll do workspace.current camera, right, in case that is what changed. We want to check if both the blur instance exists, right, if it's true, and also, or not nil, I should say, and also if the blur.parent, in other words, the camera, is set, then we are going to make sure that blur.parent is equal to camera. So kind of repeating some things, but we're doing that because things are constantly changing, and we also want to make sure that things are going to be correctly assigned. So what if our blur or our blur.parent are nil, or they don't exist, or what if one of them doesn't exist? Either way, that's going to be an else statement, then, right? We're going to go ahead and do blur, and actually I'm going to go ahead and we're going to create the new blur instance, right? Because it doesn't exist or the parent doesn't exist. So we'll make that and then we'll parent it. Pretty simple. So that will finish off that little function. So the next thing we want to do is fire this next function off on every frame, and we can do that by getting the heartbeat, right? And get that from the run service. So we're going to do game, I'm going to say get service. We're going to do run service. Now normally, if you heard my first video, you'd know that I typically like to do things like, say services, services, and then I would go ahead and do local run service, whatever. But we're not doing that here because it actually needs to be handled within the initiate function. First of all, it is also something that we're connecting a function to this heartbeat function. You can see heartbeat there fires every frame. Right, so that is your on frame. What are we firing? We're going to go and connect a built-in function here that we're going to do, take some parameters. We are going to say, first of all, if blur, if not blur, so in other words, if blur is nil, right, then that would return true. Or if our blur.parent is nil, is equal to nil, then we want to first of all go ahead and just do this again, right? So every frame it's checking, is blur not there, we need to make a new one, or is the blur parent not there, then we need to make sure that we assign that correctly. So that's taking care of that for us. And then once we've made that check, now we can go ahead and do a little math and actually set the blur size that we're looking for. So when we do local magnitude, we're going to find the magnitude of our camera's current look vector and our last look, and then we'll update the last look. So in this case, we're going to do this in parentheses. We're going to say camera.cframe.look vector, and we're going to subtract our last look, right? But taking all of that and getting the magnitude of that, which is the length in a vector 3. So then we can go our blur.size, which I can show you here. For example, if we add a blur effect here and we look into the blur, you can see that it has a size. And if we come here, you can see how that looks right now, right? And the less blur size, the less blurry, the higher blur size, the more blurry. Straightforward, right? delete that. So in this case, we're going to take our blur size and we're going to change it as such. So we're going to do the absolute value. So we're going to do math.abs, and we're going to get the absolute value of our magnitude that we just made, and we're going to multiply that by our blur amount that we set up here at the top, which is 20. I'll go ahead and separate that since that's a variable that we would change on the fly if we wanted to. So let's go ahead and now make sure that we reset our last look, because our last look is going to be wherever the new last look is, and we want that to continue to fire off every heartbeat, right? So now we'll do last look is going to be the same thing that we have up here, our camera C-frame look vector, like so. Now we have this set up inside of this initiate function, and we already have our local script looking through for any module scripts, finding them, adding them to the global table, and then it's checking if they have an initiate function, or if it has an initialize function or an initiate function. If it has either of those, it actually calls this function, which means that this should work. So when we hit play, we currently have no blur because we haven't moved. If I move ever so slightly, can't really see a blur. However, if I really start to move, you can see that blur effect really taking effect there. It is really subtle, and it's something that most people aren't going to notice, but it does create an actual cinematic effect when things are moving quickly, especially if you have a game where you are moving quickly in it. This can actually help, especially if somebody has lower frame rate in your game. This can help work that out. So that is how we set up local scripts using the same method with the global server script and the global local script, so that we can get this going this way. And again, this is where you put your loading screens as well, which is really nice. So that's going to do it for this video. In the next video, I'm actually going to take a different route. I just worked on a seagull for our Pet Paradise game, and how to have it follow a Bezier curve or a flight pattern, which is something that I struggle to find anybody else having anything to do with flying NPCs in this case, and getting this to go. So I'm going to go ahead and do a video on that and show you guys how I accomplished that. And from there, we might jump back into some more server script stuff, including coins and teleporters and all sorts of fun things that a lot of games tend to use, that I can show you how I accomplished those myself. All right. If you like this, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and if you have any comments, questions, want me to slow down, speed up, cut the fluff out, whatever you need, go ahead and let me know in the comments. I'll see if I can handle that. Otherwise, talk to you later.